Welcome to Measures of Truth, a His Dark Materials podcast. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Alan.
I'm Francis.
And I'm Anya. And today we're discussing chapters 33 through 35 of the Amber Spyglass, the third book in the His Dark Materials trilogy.
In chapter 33, Marzipan, Lyra, Will, and Mary talk to each other a lot. In doing so, they conveniently justify the ghost of that woman from the world of the dead, exhorting Mary to tell them stories. Will tells his story first, then Mary tells the tale of why she became a nun and how she lost her faith by feeling the desire for romantic love. That's not how I would describe that, but I didn't write this. Her story makes Lyra feel funny for a reason she can't understand or explain.
In chapter 34, There Is Now, Mary's tree comes crashing down, and she spots the prowling murder priest. In between, she has an epiphany. The Malefica trees began having issues 300 years ago, right around when the subtle knife was first invented. So the dust must be leaking out through all the windows cut by the knife.
In chapter 35, Over the Hills and Far Away, a weak but determined Balthamos returns and kills the murder priest before dying himself. Lyra and Will save the world by possibly fucking.
Thank you for changing
Kate,
that one
again,
word, I suppose.
Yeah, Kate definitely objects to.
Definitely not probably. Right, so general feelings. How are we all feeling about this one?
I really liked these ones. They're great. I love character stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with that. Like, I just thought they were genuinely enjoyable to read and well written. It was reading three chapters of a book that I love. Like, that's good.
I remember the end of this book being kind of like boring and underwhelming, at least compared to books 1 and 2. But this time I actually have been really enjoying it. And I think that it's kind of just a matter of expectations. Like, it has a really different pacing and kind of like priorities in the writing compared to the first two books. It's more about the theme and the character work rather than like the plotting and excitement. It's not like a big battle climax. You know, that happens earlier. And then we have this like super long period of wrapping things up. But, you know, the theme and character work is really, really good. And the prose is also really, really good. So yeah, I think it's been good.
I think that's a really good point about comparing it to the previous two books in terms of how the ending rolls out. Learning Mary's story is like kind of a climax to her arc, and what we get with Will and Lyra is an ending to their budding romance, like it's a culmination of it, possibly, probably, maybe. I don't think they had sex.
They bump against each other like moths.
No. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Oh, God.
So there's not much action here, but I really like how Pullman slows things down to let the characters like be themselves here.
I genuinely think, just in the comparison to the other two endings, that in both of them he has not given typical endings to any of them. Like in the first one, they save the kids and then she has to go deal with the polar bears, but the saving of the kids, or as many as possible, whatever, saving of Roger, well, no, fake saving of Roger, that sort of seems like that's where the story should end.
Totally.
I see.
Yeah.
And then in the second
but then
one,
it keeps going,
yeah,
and then Roger dies.
And then Roger dies, yeah. And then in the second one, there is that big, like, air battle, but that's not even affecting them, really, the kids.
Right.
that's just sort of over there. I would say the big like climax of book 2 is Will talking to his dad, and then his dad's suddenly dead.
Dispassionately put, but yeah. I thought when you said the of the 3 endings, I thought you were implying there were 3 endings to this book, and like I just hadn't like unglued some pages or something. I was like, wait, what? That sounds amazing.
I'm glad that while Will was telling his story about his dad, we get reminded about that witch killing him and it not making a goddamn bit of sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even the explanation they give here, Lyra's just like, well, witches are fierce.
Yeah, whatever.
I did enjoy Mary being like, yeah, so like love is a thing that people do. It's like, yeah, but he wasn't her lover. And you can just hear her eyes go, whoa, that bitch crazy.
It does feel like a response to like readers in that part to me, where I think Lyra at one point says like, well, when I first met you, it said that you said that you didn't have to think about good and evil. What did you mean by that? But I like that he's like in dialogue a little bit with his readers in that part. But I don't know. That's also like considered bad writing by a lot of people.
I really do wish there was like an opportunity to see like the editor letters that some authors get, because I would love to know what it's not even necessarily that I want to read the first draft so much as I just want to know what an editor had to say about it.
Favorite part?
I think we all kind of said the same thing. I tried to narrow mine down a bit, so you guys go first.
I mean, Mary's love story, I really liked it. It felt like an actual love story told by an actual person. And I think that is honestly, I think it's some of the better writing in this series because it's the most believable.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it has a lot to say about philosophy and religion without feeling didactic or like lectury. And there were a lot of parts of it that really resonated with me, despite the fact that I was never a nun, both in terms of the way that Mary relates to her belief in God and also just kind of like other people's expectations. I think there's a lot in her story that's very universal beyond the specifics of her situation, and that Pullman just like exquisitely spells out.
Yes, agreed.
I had a close second for me was a guardian angel who murders people. Really like that.
You gotta have that, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
I do love how Balthamus kind of became like a guardian angel. That was good.
But like the worst kind of guardian, like if you're gonna do a guardian angel, he totally goes against convention, right? Like he's a coward.
Yeah, that's why it's great. I love it.
Yeah, he's like kind of whiny and annoying, but like when push comes to shove, like he will murder the murder priest for you.
Literally murder someone. It was like, whoa.
My favorite was also Mary's story, but for like many, many different reasons. I do love how in this story about how she decided she didn't believe in God, it does kind of feel like she's preaching, but not in a bad way. This line that Mary has after she's left the church where she says, I felt as if something they all passionately believed in depended on me carrying on with something I didn't. That was probably my favorite part. I really loved that line. And it says a lot about how a lot of people appear to approach faith, that they need other people to believe in it for their own faith to matter. And that's interesting because it's a lot of the people that she's talking about are people who are in authority positions over her, like her parents and her priest when she was a nun and that sort of thing. These people who raise us and mentor us all need us to passionately believe in the same things that they believe in. I don't know. It's just a really good line.
Yeah, because their authority is meaningless if they step out. If you step out of your position of being under authority, then it's meaningless.
How could you do that to us? We put so much into your belief.
It feels extremely prescient given that a lot of the things that are going on today with like Christo-fascists in America And, there's like a whole generation of parents who are really upset that their adult children are leaving the faith because they were, raised in like the late 70s, 80s, and 90s with the idea that like if you follow these, Christian child training manuals exactly, you'll produce mini clones of yourself, like soldiers for Christ and all of that. I mean, I think Pullman was writing this in a slightly gentler time, and maybe it's in a more gentle British context than the current American context, but it still really speaks to what is happening in America today.
Agreed. It's also important to remember that, like, probably the most famous example of, forcing their beliefs on somebody right now is a British lady who people used to think was very progressive in her writing.
Oh, and then we realise she's a terrible bastard. And editor, you cannot take that out.
So
I would say, going back to the favorite part real quick before we move on from this, that you zooming in on that one part, Caitlin, just made me think that one of the things that she says, and I don't have the text in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to quote it. The kids ask her, like, do you miss believing in God? And she has like a real like sense of, I don't want to say like regret, but like that something was lost for her that feels very real and authentic and important to me in the themes of the book and for Mary's character. What we were talking about last time with existentialism and about life starting after despair, her carrying the weight of losing something in that belief is like a really important part of what Mary is, I think. I just really, really appreciate that part.
So I actually pulled that quote and put it down in the religion section. So we can talk about it more later. But yeah, totally agree with you on that.
I want to hear Anya's rant that she has written part of here. So let's move on to least favorite part.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yes, tell us.
So there is a line in here, which I think is the worst line of dialogue I've ever read in any book. And it's just the words, "Well, she said." But it's so bad. So basically, Lyra is going down to the water alone. There's like a beautiful description of the heron standing perfectly still on one leg. She's walking quickly. And then it's just says, "Well, she said." And then it goes into more description of her taking off her clothes and swimming in the river and how she'd never swum in salt water before. And it's just a line of dialogue that doesn't need, like, it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't do anything. Dialogue needs to earn its place in a story. Otherwise, you can just describe it with prose. He basically has 2 paragraphs of beautiful prose and then sticks 1 word of useless dialogue between them. He could have just said something like, "She sighed thoughtfully," or, whatever. The fact that she specifically said the word "well" out loud to herself does not matter. It just interrupts the flow and sounds really stupid and terrible. It's like, you know how Lonnie always says that reality is no excuse for fiction? That if you wrote dialogue in the way that people actually talk, it would be confusing and boring and terrible. Whoever his editor was, I can't believe they didn't just strike out that line. It adds nothing. It just interrupts what is otherwise beautiful prose. And it made me so mad. I was like Mrs. Scarlet with flames coming out of the side of my head.
I will contend one tiny point there, which is that I think sometimes, when you have speech that is edited for prose, it is of a particular style. And there are definitely books I've read, though the names of them sadly escape me, where dialogue is written in a more natural style, and it works because it's explicitly that more natural style. So I think it's, whilst a general rule to follow is don't write it as you'd speak it, in general, you can write prose which has that style of speech in it that works.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I just think that in this case, it adds nothing. It
It's
just
shit.
feels very disjointed and pulls you out of the story. And it's like, do we really need to know that she said the word well out loud to herself? No, we don't.
It doesn't bother me.
So my least favourite part was edited without my consent. I wonder who might have been doing that, Anya. What it actually says, well, what it said, which has now been scrubbed from the record, was marzipan. I just don't get why people like it. It's a terrible food. And whilst
Yes.
that is my opinion, it was not the point I was going to make. But also, seriously, marzipan? Really? Of all of the things? Like, pick some fucking dates or something, they're way better.
I'm actually glad you brought this up because I think that this is another interesting parallel that this book has with Narnia. Because
Yeah.
The
Who fucking
Turkish
likes
delight.
Turkish delight?
Yeah.
yes,
No one.
exactly. Both foods I tried after reading these books, and both I was horribly disappointed in.
It's funny.
Turkish Delight, the first time I tried it, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. They talk about it in Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I had
Yeah.
it whilst I was watching Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Ugh.
And it was awful.
Yep.
Okay, the actual least favourite part that I was going to talk about was why the fuck does their romance solve the dust flood? Why? Like, the implication is maybe they loved each other that much, so are we saying that the Malefa just didn't love each other enough? Is that the reason? Like, what the fuck, man?
I always just thought it was more that they were the chosen ones, that it had to be them.
The whole point of these books is that predetermination is fundamentally a bit of a weird concept, and then we look at what that brings to religion. We go, oh, maybe it's a little fucked up. Why are we suddenly using that as a crutch just now?
Well, it's been used throughout the whole book, though, throughout the whole series. Like, why can Lyra read the alethiometer? Why is Will
it's
the
full of
one with
Deus
the
Ex
knife?
Machina. We've taken the god out of the religion and put it in the machine.
Yes, I don't disagree, but I think it's because it had to be them.
But why it really particularly stuck out to me. Like the other ones I could look over, but here it's like,
It feels like the theme is invading the plot.
oh, I've
Pretty
never heard it said like that, and I love that.
I don't know. I prefer, so like Caitlin was saying earlier that she's happy with this part because it goes into the characters and that's like her thing. Obviously, I really like theme. This doesn't bother me too much, but even for me, it feels like, what? Like it doesn't necessarily follow. And the chosen oneness is weird in the way that I think Francis is articulating.
Could be, like, just spitballing. Like, obviously, I agree, the text had to have more here, but just spitballing. It could be that they're from two different worlds. Maybe that's never happened before.
Ooh. Or is that something about him being the knife bearer, since the knife is the one that made the holes?
If you were the knife bearer from Sitgatza, the first thing you'd do is you would cut your way through to the world with the most beautiful people, and you'd find love. Like, that's the first fucking thing you'd do. Like, don't give me this shit. Come on.
I don't think there's any mechanical justification for this plot-wise, like magic system-wise. It just is a thing that we find out is true, which feels a little jolting. Like I said, I don't mind it so much because if you read the whole thing symbolically, like as a psychological, like you're coming of age, growing up, they've like thrown their parents and God literally into a hole and now have like fallen in love, and that has like stabilized their identity. Like all of that tracks, right? That is like growing up. You have to like throw out the old, you have to find yourself through new experiences, including romance. So like that all tracks to me. It's just this feels clumsier than the other symbolism we've gotten.
Yeah, I do think it's definitely like Philip Pullman thought of this first, and then that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
My least favorite thing is the fact that people think that Will and Lyra had sex in these chapters, when literally nothing in the text implies that.
Yeah, but they totally did, though.
I have an actual counterpoint to that, which is I don't disagree with what you said on paper, that I don't think there's anything in the text itself that implies that, but I think there is a cultural tradition of
12-year-olds having sex.
Okay, well, they're 13.
Like coming to
and
age.
in my head, no,
Fucking hell.
no, of sex being the thing that changes everything. I think people wouldn't assume that they had sex, except that it literally saves the world and like stops the dust from flowing. And in terms of like things that, you know, a heterosexual pairing can do that have a massive impact on plot.
I disagree with everything you just said.
Really?
I think that's weird. That never once even crossed my mind until somebody else brought it up. And I was like, they're children?
For the record, I never read it as they fucked, but I think it's a very funny reading. Look, I choose chaos, okay?
Yeah, that's fair, I suppose.
In a lot of this book, Pullman is inverting things. And in a lot of literature, sex is described as like a sin that ruins everything and brings people to ruin. And so it feels like a fitting inversion that sex is what in this case actually saves the world. And I just want to say also that, like, for me personally, I'm using the word sex here very generally. I think that there is like a cultural heterosexual, you know, obsession with PIV intercourse, but sex actually can be a lot more and a lot more expansive than just that.
I would also say, whilst I agree it's icky and disconcerting, I know plenty of people who became sexually active around the age of 12 in completely reasonable manners with other 12-year-olds. Like, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's inherently anything, really, but, like,
Right.
It does happen.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I don't see it happening here. Is all,
Yeah.
I guess, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying, I don't want to judge anyone, obviously.
I know.
Anything like that. Nothing like that. I'm saying, when I first read this book, I was 13 or 14, and it never entered my mind that they had sex here. There's a bit later where I thought maybe, not here though. And then when I was an adult talking to somebody, then it was somebody who'd read it as an adult who thought they definitely had sex here. And I was like, I don't think that's what they were going for. And I think that's just a different, like, you're coming at a children's book from an adult point of view.
I appreciate that it doesn't explicitly indulge in the tradition that Anya is talking about of, like, coming of age. There's like a Rubicon that's crossed when you lose your virginity that is like central, that where everything changes. It feels more in this story like what fundamentally changes is falling in love with someone who also loves you, and how that changes your life. And that's the important thing that happens here, is the emotional connection, and the physical, like, things that happen between them are an expression of that emotion, which are like secondary to the importance of that connection, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it doesn't really matter what they did physically. They did what felt right for them and their developmental stage.
Yeah, and it doesn't do the thing that Narnia does that we talked about way back in book 1 with Susan.
The problem of Susan.
Yeah, where it's like, she's interested in lipstick and stockings and, you know, all this stuff. And so she can't come back to Narnia now because she's grown up enough to be interested in sex. Like, it's an explicit denial of that.
That all I'm fine with. I suppose I've just talked to many people who, like you said, sort of in the chapter summary, where they think fucking saved the world.
Yeah, that's
weird.
weird.
Not what happened here.
That's a weird take. Yeah.
No, that was a very sarcastic thing that I was going to rewrite, and then Francis told me not to.
I thought it was funnier. But also, like,
That's fair.
I agree that there's a massive sociological component to this, which is people see fucking as the most extreme form of love. So it's like, if you're looking for the most love, then doing the physical love apparently is the most love. It's like,
Which
well,
is so weird because we
Yeah,
see
it's a
every day that fucking is like involving the least amount of love,
Yeah.
like in a general sense.
I'm not sure I agree with that statement. But
No. I think you're absolutely right that, like, for some people, sex is an important part of the way that they express romantic love. But also, you can definitely have sex in the total absence of romantic love, and you can definitely have romantic love with the absence of sex.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they're
Yes.
not,
That's better.
yeah.
yes, it eloquently puts what we were both trying to say,
Yes.
but actually
Anyways, yes, problematic.
problematic.
Yeah, and oh my god, yes, the dog thing was so bad.
And it's
So
funny because I feel like we've complained about it before, but previously it was more implicit, and this time Lyra just straight up says it.
Yeah,
it's
servants
like-
have dogs or whatever. Servants are
Yeah,
dogs.
people-
Thus it's their telos.
And thus they enjoy being servants.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has
Perfect.
nothing to
Lyra.
do with
Good.
it has nothing to do with the unluckiness of being born poor and a lack of advancement and, like, social stratification.
What is social
No,
construction?
it's just
Or the fact that her, as like a parentless but having money orphan, got to be educated at Oxford,
Yeah.
and her best friend, who didn't have money, had to work. You know, maybe they're just not educated, for fuck's sake.
They should read
Like,
better
oh
books.
my God.
They should uplift themselves by their bootstraps.
I meant maybe they just don't have the opportunities.
No. I know.
Okay.
I think this is all. I think it's very well written, and it is intentionally problematic, and it's right to point it out. Like, I don't think that this
Yeah.
is like Pullman is doing this and being like, and that's the way the world is, right? Like,
I don't know.
do you
like,
think so?
I love the
No.
interpretation that this is just Lyra being a snub,
Yeah.
because, you know, from book one, she absolutely was a snub. But I don't think at this point Philip, as if he's my best friend,
Good old
Phil
Phil.
Pullman
call him Phil.
would
It's
write
Phil.
it that way. Is still thinking of Lyra as that snob from book one. I think this is genuinely Philip Pullman's thoughts on the matter, which is super problematic.
Yeah, I guess we've talked about it before, but there's, like, a whole, you know, history of, in particular, like, slavery apologists in America arguing that, like, you know, Black people are well suited to slavery and they actually like it and it's good for them, and all it just, like, it's too close to that for comfort.
Oh, I mean,
for
it goes all
sure.
the way back to like Plato and Aristotle, and like the entire British Empire was built on this kind of stuff, and it still hangs around in the air there, where it's like, well, if you read those kind of books, then what do you expect? But yeah, like Plato and Aristotle were both like, listen, there's a lot of slaves in Athens, and it has to be that way, and really, it's for the best. They don't even really have emotions or thoughts. And like, this is the best use of those kind of people. Like, you can tell they should be slaves, because if they shouldn't be slaves, they would fight back against being slaves. So it's like, it's the exact thing of like, servants are dogs and they're well suited because they're dogs. You know, it's a tautology.
I would be very interested to ask Philip Pullman his thoughts on this, of whether that's how he actually feels things are in this world, or if that was Lyra being not understanding the different classes in her world.
Right, other problematic that I encountered, kind of speaking again on slightly weird colonialist vibes, is the description of the Maleficent architecture just gave me sort of strange feels. Like, it felt like that very specific sort of Orientalism where things are considered good because they are traditional or because they are different. And it's like, ah, yes, the savages, they work with nature in a way that we just can't because they are different from us. And it's like, I mean, no? And also, what the fuck?
I mean, I've been reading some like indigenous philosophy, epistemology of science stuff recently. And so like on the one hand, like I feel like there is something there because capitalism is a virus or cancer or whatever. It does stand in opposition to like a lot of indigenous ways of doing things. But also there's a way of writing of like a white person writing about it that is very like oversimplified, objectifying, mystical.
And I would also point out there that we have this habit in the West of looking at Western philosophy versus indigenous philosophy. Western philosophy evolved from an indigenous ideology. That is how humans evolved. All philosophy is fundamentally rooted in the ideas behind indigenous philosophies. They may not be the same ones, but they are. Now, that's not to say that one is better or worse. And in fact, I would say in a lot of ways, things like fucking capitalism are, as you said, an absolute cancer. That doesn't make them good or bad, but I think the view that you have indigenous philosophies than other philosophies fundamentally it reinforces an idea that there is us and them. And I think that is an incredibly unhealthy idea when it's in fact, no, this is just humans.
I think this is beyond the scope of the podcast. I do think there's like a level of exploitation and extraction that occurs in capitalism that is like fundamentally different and unsustainable in a fundamentally different way. I think because a lot of my reading has been focused on environmentalism, that's kind of like the very narrow place where I'm coming from. But I think you're totally right. If you expand outside of like interactions with the environment and resource exploitation, that you like, yes.
Well, I think it's super germane though, you know, the environmentalism angle, because I think that's what this is about.
Because of the climate change.
Yeah, I think that's why
metaphor.
the Mulefa culture is depicted as being superior in some sense to the other cultures of, you know, the other human cultures in the multiverse, because it's more harmonious. What I don't like about it is like you have Noble Savage here, is the Noble Savage problem of like, the technology presents some kind of unsolvable problem for the savages because they don't have access to the technological knowledge and therefore need the inventors to solve the problem. So it has to become some kind of synthesis of the two cultures to solve the problem, which is super problematic because it justifies imperialism.
In the end, this particular element of it just comes down to more white savior complex.
Yeah.
Why? And it's because they're different from us. It's like, actually, in this case, you can make that argument probably better than people make that argument, but they use that argument for a lot of shit in our world.
Yeah, Pullman definitely didn't know he was writing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
We could maybe argue back and forth about Lyra's classism, but this one, no, that was just his his imperialism coming out.
It's kind of hippie imperialism, right? Because it's like a deferring your power to people who would be like, whoa, you're better than me because you're simpler. I'd be like, what did you just say to me?
The kind of conservative hippie vibe really comes across there. Anyway, that was enough problematics. How do we feel about
Let's talk about science.
Yeah, there's nothing problematic there.
Right.
Yeah, so I had a couple things that this section brought up for me that I wanted to talk about. So, like, Lyra, Will, and Mary talk a bit about the Mulefa and their world and how all of that relates to our understanding of evolution. And so, one of the things that Mary brings up, right, is that the Mulefa have that completely different diamond-shaped body plan. So the idea, right, is that in these different worlds or universes, you have evolution taking completely different trajectories. And of course, I think this reinforces, right, the religious themes, the idea that there's not a god specially creating animals and plants and stuff in like a predetermined image. It's, kind of random chance determining how things turn out. And so this reminded me of thought experiment or concept, often popularized by Stephen Jay Gould, who is a evolutionary biologist. And he talked a lot about the idea of replaying life's tape. So basically, like, if you could hit rewind on, time, life on Earth, would the same things evolve? Or by, the rule of just random chance, would things turn out completely differently? And I think Pullman is positing, like, yes, because you end up with this weird Mulefa world. And there's been quite a bit of research on this, mostly using experimental evolution, where we take populations of bacteria or other kind of like quickly reproducing organisms, and you can literally have replicate populations and let them evolve over, quote unquote, long periods of time relative to their generation time, and then see, do you get the same outcome every single time?
Is that the one at is it Michigan State and UT Austin?
Oh yeah.
The LTEE, is it the long-term evolution experiment?
Yeah. So, oh God, I haven't met him. I've met some of his grad students. I can't remember his name. It's like Richard something.
But yeah, I know that one was all about basically every generation you take a sample and then you allow them to, continue evolving, or maybe like every 100 generations, because actually with E. coli it's going to be every 30 minutes, is it, for a generation?
Yeah, Richard Lenski, the long-term evolution experiment. Through these experiments, it's become clear that there is some amount of determinism and some amount of randomness that together determine what evolutionary outcomes are.
But the connection being, in this case, that like Pullman is kind of positing there's nothing essential about humans. And if I'm understanding what you're saying, well, there are possibility sets, but there is like a kind of conditional, it is going to be a certain way within these parameters.
If we just look at the universes that we have seen in the series, the number that have humans in them is improbably large, as in there are 2. Like,
right.
In fact, there are 3, because there's also there's also Sidgetza, and then we have beings that are similar to. In fact, it's implied that there's a few more, and we have beings that are similar to, i.e., the Galavespians, who are basically humanoid. And like you're looking at all this, and you're going, "Well, that is in his universe, that is extraordinary." But we haven't encountered any silicon-based life, for instance. We haven't encountered many places where there's just no life at all.
I do think that kind of like your possibility space depends on how far you rewind, right? So like it's possible that once you get the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees, like something human-like was inevitable, right? Because if you think about it, like humans weren't the only human-like thing to evolve, right? There were a bunch of different species, Neanderthals and all of those, running around doing stuff.
I like this idea that the Galavespians are evolved just from tiny monkeys.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're like tamarins.
Yeah.
But it brings up an interesting point, that when did these universes diverge from each other? Did they diverge at the beginning? Were they just always parallel? Because if they were, then there's absolutely no reason for them to be anything like.
I think we've talked about how they diverge at completely different points. Like there's infinite. They're always diverging.
I think there is like a kind of category subsection of like, these are universes that have dust, which can be gotten to via the knife, right? Like, it probably can't go somewhere where there's no dust.
But okay, my question for Francis is, were you shocked by at the point of them where Mary talks about them not being vertebrates? Because this whole time, I just because they were diamond shaped, I didn't think that they were necessarily invertebrates. Seems weird.
It doesn't make
like
any fucking sense.
It's
Okay,
possible that
right.
they are vertebrates, and Mary just doesn't understand that.
Yeah, I thought
'Cause
this
she's
was
not a
weird.
I mean,
Yeah.
she is a
Okay.
physicist.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they'd be
That's
like
true, okay.
bivertebrates or some, like,
Yeah,
Or
I mean, yeah, like they
divertebrates.
could have two spinal cords and two sets of vertebrae or something. That's because it just, I mean, if it seems like they have bones, and like
Yes.
for sure.
at least on our Earth, everything that has bones is a vertebrate.
Well, the other option really is exoskeleton or floppy.
Yeah, exactly.
You're welcome.
I knew I loved jellyfish for a reason. Floppy. I was going to say, and she does point out that there are vertebrates there. So I would say they probably
Yeah.
are some sort of vertebrate. She's just confused.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
vertebrates with a different body plan. But yeah, in this section, they talk a lot about, like the mutualistic relationship between the Mulefa and their trees, and the seed pods that get used as wheels. And I was trying to think of like, what is the most similar example from our world of a mutualism like that. I think the ants and acacia trees is probably the closest, because acacia trees have basically evolved an entire structure that's just there to provide shelter for the ants. And then in return, the ants protect the tree from herbivores. But it's kind of like a combination of that and then a seed dispersal mutualism, maybe. And there are like tons of seed dispersal mutualisms. Usually they come from eating. And then it's kind of like that also crossed with seeds that need very specific harsh conditions in order to germinate. So a lot of seeds do actually need like a harsh, cold period, or like a winter. And there's some other seeds that also basically like need brush fire to trigger them to germinate. The biology nerd in me, part of it like really loves the mutualism between the Mulefa and the tree wheels, because it kind of brings together all of these different aspects from real biology in a really inventive and creative way. Okay, now we're getting to the rant part. The one part that does kind of bother me is the idea that there's these volcanic flows that make a road. It seems like it works on the surface. The problem is that geology is not stable over evolutionary timescales. So, like, the roads would have been worn down, not just from being ridden on by wheels for thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years, however long the Mulefa have been around with their culture. But also like weather. It seems like a very unstable mutualism, because the physical surface that it depends on, I could not imagine lasting super long. And so it just seems like a recipe for extinction.
A counterpoint to the idea that geology is not stable on evolutionary timescales is we have chemotrophs. So chemotrophs are animals which have evolved not to respire using oxygen, but instead they process the sulfurous chemicals coming out of essentially
Hydrothermal vents underwater.
Yeah, hydrothermal vents down on the seafloor. Now that is a geological thing, which
Okay,
we have
that's
definitely had
fair.
things that evolved to deal with. But I also agree that I think lava flows would have to be very regularly renewed in a consistent manner. So maybe if you had weak points in the crust, but then that would be a thing which they would probably have made much more of a big deal about in their culture, because they're probably more important, or as important than as the trees.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Agree
How would you have giant trees?
Yeah, well, and also it gives you a three-way mutualism, and those are incredibly rare in nature.
And also that usually in order to have lava flows, you need volcanoes, and the area therein is described as very, very flat. I'm going to push back on your use of the phrase three-way mutualism, because I don't think you can have a mutualism with a non-living thing, and volcanoes don't benefit.
On that note, do we want to move on to religion?
There's a lot more Anya stuff.
Yeah, sorry guys. There were just so many
Don't
good
lie.
quotes.
You have a 5-page document that you didn't put in the notes. We know how you work, Alan. Don't.
Yeah. When there was a line that Mary had when she was telling her story that says, the Christian religion is a very powerful and convincing mistake, that's all. And the Buffy fan in my brain just immediately responded that, like, as Giles would say, the subtext is rapidly becoming text. That
They were just saying it now.
whatever,
So good.
yeah, whatever Pullman had been implying a bit in books 1 and 2, now he's just like, no, Christianity, very powerful and convincing mistake. And yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about Mary's response to the kiddos questioning her about good and evil, because she says that, wait, what are you laughing at?
The fact that you call them kiddos in the same episode that you're trying to convince us they had sex. Sorry.
Relatively speaking, I call them the undergraduate students that I teach children behind their backs.
Okay,
So it's
okay.
fine. Yeah, it's tongue in cheek.
Behind their backs? I call them to their faces.
Yeah.
I can get away with it. I'm British. It's fine.
Anyway, so Mary says, good and evil are names for what people do, not for what they are. All we can say is that this is a good deed because it helps someone, or that's an evil one because it hurts them. People are too complicated to have simple labels.
Ugh, I love it. I love that so
Yeah,
much.
it's so good. I think it works because I believe that it's partially what Pullman believes, but it also comes across as like very genuine to what someone like Mary would land on after losing her faith.
And it's also such a good thing to say after we just saw Mrs. Coulter and Asriel sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, oh my god, that's such a good point. Yeah, people are too complicated for simple labels.
It's just such a good theme in the book.
But they were bastards.
They were bastards, but they did do
But they did
a couple of good things.
They
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, I think that's like the heart of existentialism is like you're never totally inscribed. You always, like every minute is another chance to turn it all around. Right?
Yeah, and it's very inspirational,
Yeah.
I think.
It can be. Like you could be a really good person your whole life and become a total bastard at the last minute too. So never give up hope.
Yeah.
You can always be that bastard.
And then the final quote that I pulled was the one that you referenced, Alan, in the intro about what Mary felt like she lost when she lost her faith. So initially when she's talking to Will and Lyra, she says, "What I missed most is the sense of being connected to the whole of the universe. I used to feel I was connected to God like that, and because he was there, I was connected to the whole of his creation." And then later on, the like omniscient narrator says, "This was the very thing she told Will about when he asked if she missed God. It was the sense that the whole universe was alive and that everything was connected to everything else by threads of meaning. When she'd been a Christian, she had felt connected too. But when she left the church, she felt loose and free and light in a universe without purpose." And then I guess I feel like, so there's an important bit that I didn't paste in here where I think she's able to find her purpose. I think she talks about the like the wind and the grass and the trees and everything. And she saw what they were doing at last. She saw what the great urgent purpose was. They were trying to hold back the dust flood. They were striving to put some barriers up against the terrible stream. Wind, moon, clouds, leaves, grass, all those lovely things were crying out and hurling themselves into the struggle to keep the shadow particles in this universe, which they so enriched. Matter loved dust. It didn't want to see it go. That was the meaning of this night, and it was Mary's meaning too. Had she thought there was no meaning in life, no purpose, when God had gone? Yes, she had thought that. Well, there is now, she said aloud, and again louder. There is now. So I think it's like this really beautiful, almost like 3 short acts, right? Where it's like her belief in God gives her the sense of connection to everything and a sense of meaning and purpose. Then she, loses her faith and loses that sense of connection and purpose, but actually sees it as a good thing because it gives her a sense of like freedom. And then she manages to find a different type of purpose in the absence of her religious faith. And so I think that's like, it's a little microcosm story that kind of mirrors the larger story and like what I think Pullman is really trying to do with this series is show that you can find meaning and purpose without religion.
One thing that I always also liked about how she says she misses the connection is that, as someone who has never been a part of a religion, one thing that I've always liked about religions is the sense of community. Mm-hmm. And, in I suppose good ones, if you want to call it that you have this community behind you who will be there for you. And I can see where the feeling the loss of the connection to the universe, she would also have lost that community.
I would say also that it's important to note that a bunch of, cults use exactly the same problem as leverage against people who are in the cult. You take away people's community, you make it so the cult is their community, and then it makes it harder to leave. Even the Catholic Church, to an extent, which isn't quite a cult, still has those elements of of shame and of social outcastness. That, actually, it's excommunication.
Yeah, I was going to say it's literally excommunication. Yeah, throwing people out of a community is a very powerful tool to use for your institution. Pullman is kind of saying here that this is what adulthood is like losing those old beliefs and constructing your beliefs, based on what you actually see and believe and can participate in and be responsible for and do, right? Like you do being yourself. That is what adulthood is. And it comes at a cost of losing the sureness that you had before. There's a sadness to it, but that's part of what makes it real.
We've been so fast recently, for our standards at least, and today we're at 2 hours and we haven't even started Alan's religion section yet. So
I'll say my section is very short. So
thank God. The document is short.
Yeah. So I would just acknowledge that we get a Garden of Eden scene. I don't want to just pass over. Obviously we don't get Passover, but we do get the Garden of Eden.
Wait, explain it to Anya because she doesn't understand.
So first off, we get a long conversation from Mary where she explains her backstory of her love life and all that, which is kind of like the serpent talking to Adam and Eve. She's literally the serpent in terms.
That is her role. Yeah,
her designation.
Yeah.
And so
she says to eat the marzipan, but they very intelligently have a fruit instead.
They don't eat marzipan because they know it's bad.
Yeah, fuck marzipan.
Am I the only person here who actually likes marzipan?
Are you the only person in the world who likes marzipan?
Her and Philip Pullman, apparently. But yeah, so she gives them kind of tacit permission to be like, these feelings are good and like natural, and the church told me that they were bad, but I felt that they were good. And so in the Garden of Eden story, you get the command from God, don't eat the fruit. And then the serpent comes to Eve and says, like, if you eat that fruit, nothing bad will actually happen. You'll become like God. And that's why he doesn't want you to eat it. And kind of gives her permission, or like exposes her to a viewpoint that she hasn't been exposed to before, and saying like, you know, this is a thing that is an option for you. It's a choice.
And I think that's why people think they have sex, because, right, like eating the fruit, I guess it gives Adam and Eve body shame and like sexual awareness. I don't know.
It's funny because in the Bible, the very first thing that Adam and Eve do is have sex. Like they see each other after Eve has been created from Adam, and then immediately have sex.
And that's before the fruit.
Yeah,
and it's fine.
It's way before the fruit. Yes. Okay. So they haven't even been told about the fruit at that point. I guess, you know, like biblically, it portrays sex as natural, which then some people would take the extra step and say heterosexual sex is natural. But it's just saying that like sex is just a thing that people do, just like eating food and naming things, which are the other two things that Adam and Eve do.
I did also just want to throw out that during this chapter, when they're talking about the mulefa and the vertebrates and invertebrates, the one vertebrate they mention is a snake as existing in this world.
And I noticed that too.
I understand that you literally, a couple paragraphs later, literally say Christianity was a mistake, but also you're kind of hammering us on the head with this here.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like it, but it's, yeah.
There's like all the Greek gods have animals that are associated with them. I think most people are more familiar with like the bird sign, like Zeus has eagle, Athena has an owl. But Athena's actual animal, Athena is the goddess of wisdom, is a snake. For people who are familiar, you know, like the early Christians of the first 200 years of Christianity, who are familiar with Greek mythology and the Gnostics especially, wisdom being in the form of a serpent, or like a serpent being, you know, wise beyond its seeming capacity, would be like an obvious reference to Athena. And I think Philip Pullman preserves that idea here. Like he's playing with Gnostic stuff on purpose. And so the Garden of Eden thing is where, you know, Lyra and Will feed each other the fruit and admit their love for each other, and like are relieved and gratified, and like they kiss. They come to a fuller knowledge of each other, which feels more Gnostic. This is not like a fall, right? This is depicted as a very good thing that happens to them. And so it's inverting the place of Eden in traditional Catholic theology of like, here is a bad thing that happened. And the magisterium thinks that this is a bad thing that's happening, and casts it in a more Gnostic way where they come to a deeper knowledge of each other and themselves. And that's a good thing.
That's sort of fulfilling the whole theme of the book, that knowledge and wisdom is good and not knowledge is bad.
Right. So the biggest thing to me is, again, we're going to go back to Mary's chapter talking to the kiddos. And how I really, really, really like that Mary does not come to some kind of like epistemological, what's the word when it's like Occam's razor, when it's like you get rid of the extra stuff?
Parsimony.
Yeah, she doesn't.
Yeah, maximum parsimony.
She doesn't have like a maximum parsimony moment of like new atheism for a conversion. I see this as like she has a philosophically basic kind of anti-conversion or whatever. She doesn't go like, there is no God in the universe, therefore I must be an atheist, right? She has what Calvin called, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, the sensus divinitas, this extra sense, right? Beyond your like other senses that you have, this inner sense that you have that like God is out there and he's real and he's talking to me. And I feel like there's a God, and therefore I have this basic belief, the same way that I know that I'm hungry or need to pee, I know that there's a God. I don't need to justify it. Like I feel it. That's what Mary has, except it's no God. She has a feeling that there is no God. And so her belief is basic, philosophically basic is what that's called. Now you can have basic beliefs that are incorrect, that are like factually wrong, that are provably wrong. But it doesn't like contravene the fact that they're basic. Like you really do feel whatever it is that you really do feel. So the point of what I'm saying is that like Mary's personal kind of subjectivity is at the heart of how she needs to live her life. So this is kind of gets back into existentialism. It's not devotion to the ideology of atheism or science or like a different kind of Christianity. She's not an atheist because the absence of God logically demands she be an atheist. She's an atheist because she feels deep down in herself there is no God. She chooses to be an atheist as an expression of authenticity to herself.
Ooh, I like that way of phrasing it.
So I really, really like that in the way that she talks to the kids about it. She never like lays out a reductio about God and being like, only an idiot would believe in God because clearly there's no God and I'm not an idiot. And therefore, you know what I mean? Like there's a real shitty way. Like sometimes you hear this.
She's not a Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins new atheist.
Exactly, yeah. Where it's like, I've suffered this big loss, and I wish that I was an idiot who believed that there was an afterlife so that I could see them later. But unfortunately, I'm a magnificent genius, and I can't believe in religion. So like, she's not shitty about it, is what I'm saying, and it's very existential in its character. The entire way that it's built. So I just really, really appreciate it. It's very human and very like excellent. So that's everything that I wrote down for religion.
Ta-da!
I apparently have somehow defeated Anya in this next bit, and it makes me feel good.
Yes, I concede that Mary has probably had more than one orgasm. Based on the fact that she did have a partner who she lived with for many years. So I'm assuming they figured that out. Okay, well, I think that's it for this episode. Next time, we will be talking about chapters 36 through 38, and we will be finishing our last episode on the Amber Spyglass.
Oh my god.
So that's very exciting. If you like our show, please take some time to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. I'm Anya, and I'm sex-crazed, and you can follow me on Twitter.
I'm sorry. God. That's not what I was trying to say.
No, it's fine. I'm just giving you a hard time. That's strangely then Literl.
I'm Caitlin, and you can follow me on Twitter at InferiorCaitlin.
I'm Francis, and I am sex positive, and you can follow me on Twitter at Francis Windrum.
You can follow the show on Twitter at MOTPod. Need more than 280 characters to speak your mind? Send your emails to contact@hollowedgroundmedia.com.
And remember to never trust British children when it comes to the very important topic of candy. Welcome to Measures of Truth, a His Dark Materials podcast. I'm Caitlin.
I'm Alan.
I'm Francis.
And I'm Anya. Oh, fuck.
Weird.
I don't know why I just forgot that you existed. I'm literally in your house.
I knew the lag was quite something. I didn't realize you were compensating that heavily for it. Fuck.
I just got really excited. Sorry.
I'm glad that it'd be a really cool move. Just like
I'm glad that Will.
Sorry.
Fine. You keep going.
Oh my god. No. You've made a big deal out of it now.
No, you go, then I'll go.
Anya, you just edited my quote from the book. It's a
No,
quote
but
from
that
the
is
book.
the actual. I know, and I'm pretty sure. No, because
I'm
stumbled
literally
over that
looking at
sentence
it.
and went
I
back
felt
over it.
as if something they all passionately believed in depended on me carrying on with something I didn't.
Fine, fine.
Look, different editions in different countries, okay?
Yeah.
Maybe.
No.
But there was definitely like in the 80s and 90s, and not that I lived there, but Francis, be quiet while I'm talking, please. But I think there
You
was
can
like
tell
a
who's the father, can't you?
yeah. I should read the document so I don't preempt things.
And definitely modify all of Caitlin's quotes as she's reading them.
That I have literally copied from the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually Anya is who Philip Pullman's editor is.
Okay, well, I guess my work here is done. I'm just gonna take my headphones out and
On to problematics.
log off for the rest even though it's funny, I feel like usually I have the least text in our document, and this time it's like 90% me.
No, I love it. It's good.
I wrote my stuff on a little sticky because I didn't want you all seeing my notes.
Good.
What, because we might edit them?
Well, as we have seen today, we will edit Philip Pullman if we need to.
I mean, honestly, we could probably have done that for the betterment of humanity.
Various points.
That's not a philosophical point. That's a sociological point. That's a PowerPoint.
PowerPoint. Sorry.
I didn't mean that to be a Microsoft Office joke,
I know.
but like it's
More into it. Whose phone was that?
That was Caitlin was scrolling through Facebook while you all had your science orgasm.
Caitlin needs to learn to mute their microphone when they browse Twitter like the rest of us.
Yes. Please cut that out.
No.
You mean put it at the end as an outtake?
Yes.
Worlds that took such a different evolutionary track
Yeah.
might be completely different shapes. Shapes isn't the
Yeah.
word. You know
It's
what
a
I'm saying.
triangle world.
I didn't mean that. I meant like the mountains and shit, for fuck's sake.
It would be like,
Look, hexagon world is
I guess
best
mountains
world.
are
That's all
kind
I'm
of a
saying.
triangle.
or like some kind of weird.
I have a alternative, but we'll come to that when you finish your rant.
It's not a rant, it's a lecture.
When you finish your lecture, Professor.
There'd be more yelling if I was ranting.
I enjoyed that somebody wrote climate change, bolded it, underlined it, and italicized it.
I didn't do all that to it, but I just wrote it initially. Yeah, make it bigger. Good.
The real podcast is in our notes, folks.
I wish you guys could see these.
That's what Pullman thinks anyway. But I know that adulthood is just like, you just
Chores.
indulge yourself in anything
Oh,
that you want constantly.
I indulge myself in
I like-
crying into my morning whiskey.
That's funny. I like how you said adult being an adult is, and you went with hedonism and
Yeah.
I went with chores, even though I feel like that's the reverse of our actual personality.
Yeah, it's probably the opposite.